My fiancé cheated with my brother at our engagement party, but when my own parents took his side, I cut contact for 2 years. Now an accident left them in a coma, and everyone expects me to raise their baby. I'm 31 years old. I work in real estate, and I need to tell this story because, honestly, I still can't believe my life turned into this. About 2.5 years ago, my fiancé cheated on me with my younger brother on the day of our engagement party, and if you think that's the worst thing that happened, wait until you hear the rest. The thing is that after all the initial drama, 2 years passed without talking to any of them. And then I got a call from my mother telling me that Tyler and Jessica were in a coma after a horrible accident. And oh yeah, by the way, they had a 2-month-old baby that someone needed to take care of. But let me start from the beginning because this story is a complete mess. Jessica and I were together for 7 years. I mean, since we were like 23 and 24 years old respectively. We met at a work conference. She was an accountant, and I was just starting in real estate, and honestly I thought she was the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. You know, that feeling that you just fit together. We had plans. We talked about getting married eventually, buying a house together, all that stuff. My family adored her, especially my brother Tyler, who at that time was like 26 and had always been quieter, more reserved than me. Tyler worked in it, still lived with my parents because he was saving for his own place, and Jessica and him got along well, like normal. Nothing that made me suspect absolutely anything. So finally I decided it was the perfect time to propose to her. We'd been together 7 years. We were both stable in our jobs. I'd saved enough for a decent ring, and I just felt it was right. I planned everything very carefully. Took her to this super nice restaurant with a river view where we'd had our first real date. I got down on one knee with the ring and the whole show, and she said yes. She was crying. I was crying. People at other tables applauded us. It was perfect, literally like a movie. What I didn't know is that everything was going to blow up in my face exactly 3 weeks later. We decided to have an engagement party at my parents' house because they have a big yard, and my mother was super excited about organizing everything. We invited like 50 people, friends, family, co-workers. Jessica's family also came. Her parents were always cool with me. The party was going amazingly. There was music, food. Everyone was happy, celebrating with us. And I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Jessica looked beautiful that day. She was wearing a blue dress that I'd helped her pick out. And I remember thinking, this is my life now. This is real. Then, at one point during the party, like around 9 at night, I realized I hadn't seen Jessica in a while. I asked some friends if they'd seen her, and nobody knew where she was. I didn't see Tyler anywhere either, which didn't seem that weird to me at first, because Tyler sometimes got overwhelmed at big social events and would go somewhere quiet. But something in my stomach felt weird, I don't know, like a hunch or whatever. I decided to look for them and eventually went out to the backyard, the part that's furthest from where all the people were, and there I saw them. Tyler and Jessica were kissing, and when I say kissing, I don't mean a friendly kiss on the cheek. They were literally going at it, with their hands in each other's hair and everything. I stood there for what seemed like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. I couldn't process what I was seeing, like my brain just shut down. Then finally I said something. I don't even remember what. I think I just yelled, "What the fuck?" And they pulled apart suddenly. Jessica's face. God, I'll never forget that expression, like half panic, half guilt. But there was also something else there, like part of her wasn't really surprised that I'd caught them. Tyler wouldn't even look me in the eyes. He just stood there staring at the ground like a coward. I went back inside, grabbed my keys, and left the party without saying anything to anyone else. Jessica followed me to the car screaming my name. "Michael, wait! Michael, please!" But I just got in the car and took off. I drove aimlessly for like 2 hours. My hands were shaking so much I almost crashed a couple times, and eventually I ended up at my best friend Dan's apartment. I told him everything and he just let me stay on his couch that night because I couldn't even think about going back to my own apartment where Jessica and I lived together. The next day, Jessica showed up at Dan's work looking for me. I don't know how she knew I was there. I guess she figured it out. She told me we needed to talk, and eventually I agreed because, well, I needed answers, even though I wasn't sure if I really wanted to hear them. We went to a coffee shop nearby, and that's when she dropped the whole truth on me. She told me that she and Tyler had been developing feelings for each other over the last few months, that at first they tried to ignore it, but they couldn't keep lying anymore. The part that hurt the most was when she started justifying it by saying things like, I was too controlling, that I never listened to her, that Tyler understood her in ways I didn't, and I was like, are you kidding me? 7 years together, and now it turns out I'm this horrible person she's describing. I asked her if she'd ever really loved me, and she said yes, but that things change, people change. All those cliché phrases people say when they want to justify screwing everything up. She gave me back the ring right there on the coffee shop table, which was super awkward because the waitress was literally serving our coffees when Jessica put the ring on the table. I told her that obviously the engagement was canceled, that she could stay in the apartment until she found another place, because technically the lease was in both our names, but that I was going to find somewhere to stay in the meantime, and that was it. 7 years. Ended in a 30-minute conversation at a generic coffee shop. What came after was almost worse than the cheating itself. I called my parents that same afternoon to tell them what had happened, expecting, I don't know, maybe some support, or at least for them to be angry with Tyler for what he did. But instead, my father told me I needed to be more understanding, that these things happen, that Tyler was suffering too. My mother was worse. She literally told me that maybe Jessica was right, that I'd always been a bit difficult, a bit too serious, and that Tyler was more relaxed, and that's probably why Jessica felt more comfortable with him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, like my own parents were taking my brother's side who had just kissed my fiancée at my engagement party. I tried to reason with them. I told them it wasn't about being understanding. It was about Tyler and Jessica betraying me in the worst possible way. But my father just kept saying I was being dramatic, that I needed to grow up and accept that sometimes things don't work out as planned. I hung up the phone and didn't talk to them again for 2 weeks. During that time, I stayed with Dan and his girlfriend, looked for a new apartment for myself because I couldn't stand the idea of staying in the place where Jessica and I had lived together, and basically tried to pick up the pieces of my life. Jessica eventually moved out of the apartment we shared, and according to what I heard from mutual friends, she went to live with Tyler at my parents' house. Yeah, you read that right. My parents let them live together in their house as if nothing bad had happened. This was like a month after the engagement party. Jessica's parents at least had the decency to call me and apologize for what their daughter had done. Her mother was crying on the phone telling me she couldn't believe Jessica had done something like that they always thought I was perfect for her. And honestly, that call meant more to me than anything my own parents had said. I decided at that moment that I needed to cut all contact with my family. I blocked my parents and Tyler's numbers, blocked them on all social media, basically erased them from my life. My friends completely supported me, told me I was doing the right thing, that nobody deserved to be treated that way, especially by their own family. Dan and his girlfriend helped me move to my new apartment. My other friends organized outings to distract me, and little by little, I started to feel better, or at least to feel less pain all the time. Like a year after all the drama, I heard from one of those mutual friends that remain after a breakup that Tyler and Jessica had gotten married. They had a private ceremony, just immediate family and some close friends, basically the opposite of what Jessica and I had planned, which was a big wedding with all our loved ones. I'm not gonna lie, when I found out I felt weird, not exactly sad, but I don't know, like it was the official end of something. You know what I mean? Like there was no going back anymore. It wasn't just an affair or a moment of weakness. They were really building a life together. The next 2 years were pretty quiet in comparison. I focused on my work, got promoted to regional manager at the real estate company, started going out more. I even had a couple casual relationships, though nothing serious because honestly I was still processing everything. My friends became my real family. We spent holidays together, supported each other, and I got to a point where entire days would pass without thinking about Jessica, or Tyler, or my parents. It wasn't complete happiness, but it was peace, and that was enough. Then about 6 months ago, on a normal Tuesday, I was at work showing a house to some clients when my phone started ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had the area code from my hometown. I normally don't answer calls from unknown numbers, but something made me answer this time. It was my mother, and as soon as I heard her voice, I knew something was very wrong. She was crying hysterically. I could barely understand what she was saying. A truck had run a red light and hit them from the side while they were on their way to the supermarket. Both were in the ICU in induced comas. The injuries were serious, multiple fractures, head trauma, everything sounded horrible. My first honest reaction was like a frozen shock. I didn't feel anything specific, just this weird emptiness. My mother was begging me to go to the hospital, saying they needed all the family there, that Tyler was my brother and I had to be there for him. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. I took the rest of the day off work and went home to process everything. Honestly, I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, obviously I didn't want Tyler and Jessica to be hurt or dying, like I'm not a monster, but on the other hand, was I supposed to just forget everything they did to me and run to the hospital as if we were a happy family? I called Dan and we talked for hours. He told me to do what felt right for me, that I didn't owe anyone anything, especially not the people who had hurt me so deeply. 2 weeks passed and I hadn't gone to the hospital or returned my mother's calls. She called me almost every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, leaving voicemails begging me to come, telling me I'd regret it if I didn't. My father also called a couple times, but his messages were shorter, colder, basically just saying it was my responsibility as family to be there. I ignored all the messages because frankly I didn't know what to say, and I wasn't ready to deal with any of them. Then came the real bombshell. My parents showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning without warning, but when I opened the door and saw them standing there, I froze. My mother looked awful, like she hadn't slept in weeks, and my father had this hard expression he used to get when he was angry but trying to control himself. I let them in because, well, what else was I going to do? And we sat in my living room in this super awkward silence for a minute before my mother started talking. She told me that Tyler and Jessica had started waking up from the coma, that the doctors were optimistic about their recovery. And I thought, okay, that's good. At least they're not going to die. But then my mother said something I honestly didn't see coming at all. She told me that Tyler and Jessica had a baby, a 2-month-old boy who was with Jessica's parents during all this time. Apparently, Jessica had been pregnant when the accident happened and had given birth like a month before the accident. Nobody had told me anything about a baby in all those calls and messages, and when I asked my mother why she hadn't mentioned it before, she just said it hadn't seemed relevant at the time because they were focused on Tyler and Jessica surviving. Then came the part that really made me angry. My father leaned forward and told me very seriously that they needed my help with the baby. Jessica's parents were older, they were like 65 years old, and couldn't take care of a baby full-time for much longer. My parents were also still working. My mother was a teacher, and my father worked in construction, so they couldn't take charge of the baby completely either. They were asking me, no, basically demanding that I help take care of my nephew, while Tyler and Jessica recovered. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them no way, that they had taken Tyler and Jessica's side when they betrayed me, that they had made me feel like I was the problem, and that now that they needed something from me, suddenly I was family again. My father got super defensive, started yelling that this wasn't about old grudges, that there was an innocent baby involved who needed care. My mother started crying, again saying how could I be so selfish, that this baby was my nephew, my own blood. I told them I understood there was a baby and that I felt sad for him, but that it wasn't my responsibility to fix this situation. Tyler and Jessica made the decision to be together, to get married, to have a baby, and those were their decisions, not mine. Besides, I didn't even know how to take care of a baby. I'd never been around babies, and frankly, I didn't want to be involved in Tyler and Jessica's life in any way. My father called me immature, told me I was acting like a resentful child, and I basically asked them to leave my apartment. Before leaving, my mother begged me one last time to at least go to the hospital to see Tyler and Jessica, even if just for a few minutes. I told her I'd think about it, but we both knew I probably wasn't going to go. After they left, I sat on my couch for hours, just staring at the wall. Dan came over later that night after I sent him a message telling him what had happened, and he told me nobody could force me to do anything I didn't want to do, that I'd set my boundaries 2 years ago and I had every right to maintain them. But the thing is, I couldn't stop thinking about the baby. Not about Tyler or Jessica, but about that 2-month-old child who didn't ask to be born in the middle of all this drama. I wondered what he looked like, if he resembled Tyler, if eventually he'd grow up and hear this whole horrible story about his family. But at the same time, every time I considered getting involved even a little bit, I remembered the engagement party. I remembered Jessica giving me back the ring. I remembered my parents telling me I was the problem, and I just couldn't do it. About 2 weeks after my parents' visit, my mother sent me a text message saying that Tyler and Jessica had fully woken up from the coma and were starting physical rehabilitation. They were going to be okay. The doctors said they'd probably make a full recovery, though it's going to take months. Honestly, I felt relieved to hear that. Not because I missed them or wanted a relationship with them, but simply because it was good to know they weren't going to die and leave that baby an orphan. I decided to do something that probably sounds weird, but that I felt I needed to do. I went to the hospital one day when I knew my parents wouldn't be there. It was a weekday, like at 2 in the afternoon. I told the nurse I was family, and she let me into the room where Tyler and Jessica were. They'd been in separate rooms in the ICU, but now they'd moved them to a shared room on the rehabilitation floor. Both were asleep when I entered, connected to some machines, but they looked much better than I'd imagined. I stood there for a while just looking at them. Tyler's face was still kind of swollen from the injuries, and Jessica had a huge cast on one leg. They looked vulnerable, like really human, in a way that was hard to process. Then a nurse came in with the baby. Apparently, Jessica's parents brought him every day, so Tyler and Jessica could see him, though they were still too weak to hold him for long. The nurse saw me and assumed I was a family member there to help, so she offered to let me hold the baby while she fixed something with Jessica's monitors. I held my nephew for the first time in my life. He was super small, probably like 3 or 4 months old at that point, and he looked at me with those big eyes that babies have. I didn't feel this instant connection that people always describe, but I didn't feel anything negative either. He was just a baby. A small human being who had no idea about all the drama surrounding him. The nurse asked me what his name was because apparently she wasn't sure, and I honestly told her I didn't know, that I'd been out of the family circle for a while. After a few minutes, I gave the baby back to the nurse and left the hospital without telling anyone I'd been there. I didn't wake up Tyler or Jessica, didn't leave a note, just left. On the way home, I felt strange. Not exactly sad, but not relieved either. Just like closed, if that makes sense. I felt like I'd done what I needed to do for myself, that I'd seen with my own eyes that everyone was going to be okay, and that now I could move forward with my life without wondering what would have happened if I hadn't gone. A few more months passed, and my mother sent me occasional updates by text message that I'd read, but rarely answered. Tyler and Jessica were progressing in their rehabilitation. The baby was growing well. Everyone was basically getting back to normal. My parents had stopped asking me to get involved. I guess they finally understood I wasn't going to change my mind. The distance felt good, honestly. It wasn't like I missed them, but I didn't actively hate them either. They were just like people who used to be in my life and weren't anymore, and that was fine. Then, about 3 months ago, I got a text message from Tyler. It was super weird to see his name appear on my phone after years. The message was long, basically an apology for everything that had happened. He said the accident had made him really think about his life, about the decisions he'd made, and that he realized what he did to me was unforgivable. Jessica also sent her own separate message saying similar things, that she was very sorry, that it should never have happened the way it did, that she understood if I never wanted to talk to her again. I read both messages several times. Part of me wanted to ignore them completely, but another part felt that after all this time they deserved at least some kind of response. I answered both of them separately and very briefly. I told them I appreciated the apologies, that I hoped their recovery continued well, and that I wished them the best with their son. But I was also honest, and told them that although I could eventually forgive, I was never going to forget, and that I didn't see a future where we'd have a close relationship again. Tyler responded saying he understood. Jessica didn't respond at all. My parents also tried to reconnect after that. My mother called me and we had a long conversation where finally, after literally years, she admitted they'd handled the whole situation horribly. She said they were so focused on not losing both sons that they ended up losing one completely, and that she understood why I'd cut contact. It wasn't a perfect apology, and honestly, it came years too late. but it was something. I told her I wasn't ready for a close relationship with them either, but that maybe eventually we could rebuild something. It was just going to take time. Today I'm in a much better place. I met someone a few months ago, a woman who works in architecture and who makes me laugh in ways I hadn't laughed in years. We're taking things slow because she knows my whole story and understands why I'm cautious with relationships. My friends continue to be my main support system. They're my real family in all the ways that matter. My work is going well. They just gave me another promotion that comes with a significant raise, and I'm saving to buy my own house instead of continuing to rent. As for Tyler, Jessica, my parents, and my nephew, I don't have much contact with them. I exchange occasional messages with my mother, nothing deep, just like birthday wishes and stuff like that. Tyler and Jessica are completely physically recovered, according to what my mother has told me, and the baby is now like 7 months old. I never saw them in person again after that day at the hospital, and honestly, I don't feel the need to. I don't wish them anything bad. Really. I hope they're good parents to that child and that they build a happy life together. But that life doesn't include me, and I'm at peace with that. Sometimes I wonder how everything would have been if Jessica and Tyler had simply told me the truth before things went so far. If they'd had the courage to break up with me first before kissing at my engagement party. Maybe it wouldn't have hurt so much. Maybe my family wouldn't have been divided this way. But at the same time, all this taught me a lot about boundaries, about self-worth, about how family doesn't always mean unconditional support. I learned that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, and that building your own chosen family is just as valid as maintaining biological ties. Last week, my girlfriend asked me if I ever thought about trying to have a relationship with my nephew when he was older. I told her honestly that I didn't know, that maybe when he was old enough to understand the situation and decide for himself if he wanted to meet me, but that I wasn't going to force anything. She understood me, told me that whatever my decision was, she'd support me. And that's exactly the kind of relationship I need in my life now. Someone who respects me, who doesn't judge me for the difficult decisions I've had to make, and who's building a future with me instead of being stuck in the past. I guess the conclusion of all this is that life throws you things you never expected, that people you trust can betray you in the worst ways, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to support you are the first to let you fall. But I also learned that you can survive that you can rebuild yourself and find happiness again, and that forgiving doesn't mean you have to let those people back into your life. I've forgiven Tyler and Jessica in the sense that I no longer spend my days angry at them or wishing they'd suffer, but that doesn't mean I'm going to invite them to my eventual wedding or that I want them to be part of my daily life, and I'm completely okay with that.